perhaps you could take us through the legal processes in the earliest days. The accident was in August last year. It took a while, but I mean, she has been charged, hasn't she?
Yeah. Unfortunately, in the early days, there was some strange things going on.
I should say
and, that's one of the biggest issues and one of the biggest concerns that I have is the way that this family was treated after this tragedy. And, they're simple, normal people. They didn't really understand what was going on.
I've just done the thing that I know. I've actually just referred to it as an accident. And I know that bristles a little.
It does. The reason we don't use the word accident is because that implies that the event wasn't preventable, and we mustn't use that word because it's almost apologizing for it. It's almost because there's a difference between accidental and unintentional. Yes. Everybody knows she didn't intend it, but the CPS concluded after a lot of consideration that she drove dangerously that night. Now, if you and I were to go out into the streets in London and drive dangerously, of course we don't intend to harm anybody, but it's not accidental, and it's a criminal offence.
It's I think you run up against journalist training courses because they invariably, one of the big areas they look at are accidents, and they always say you should be very careful with the language you use. You shouldn't impart guilt.
But
so
that's
it's
not
in
just
collision.
me saying
yes,
that.
exactly. Because the CPS have taken a view, haven't they?
The CPS have taken a view. But if you look at the road safety experts out there and the charities such as Brake, they will do what I do, which is say, don't use the word accident.
Okay. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, I thought we could talk a little bit about what Harry was like. 19, mad on his motorcycle, was mad on Northampton Football Club. A pretty normal lad, actually.
Incredibly normal. And now he's become this, global phenomenon. We see his picture on the telly and the newspapers every day, but he was just a normal lad. I've known him since he was 2 years old. A
very experienced biker. It has to be said. He was riding at 13 and...
he passed his test when he was 16, and then he was away. And everybody...
50,000 miles.
50,000 miles by the age of 19. And I've met loads of bikers, people who rode with him. He was incredibly safe. He was incredibly capable. And... of course, that night he was riding perfectly safely and unfortunately met his fate.
So, who is Anne Sacoolas? Because this part of the story, rather like an onion, it keeps revealing more and more sides, and I suppose the process creates suspicion.
And that's the problem. Now, when you go through your darkest hour, what you don't want to do is have uncertainty. You want the authorities to come to you and be honest. If it's bad news, that's fine. You can then process and deal with it. And unfortunately, Matthew, as the further we delve into this, the murkier it gets. And we have clear evidence of information being withheld, the family being misled, and of course they're very suspicious.
We're told, first of all, the first sort of raft of stories was that Anne Sacoolas was a housewife whose husband was working with a US department on an Air Force base.
Correct.
Then after she leaves the country, Anne Sacoolas' status changes somewhat to a CIA agent?
But I got a phone call from a tabloid journalist who told me that. If that was the case, then, we should have been told by the Foreign Secretary. We'd now met with him 4 times. The parents had asked that question specifically of him, and he wasn't candid with them.
Do you think that they know at that time that because it's quite possible that they would be kept in the dark as well?
The official line is that when Anne Sacoolas arrived, she was only notified to the Foreign Office as the spouse of a diplomat. That's the official line. Matthew, I wasn't born yesterday. Of course they knew. And, she's an experienced and a senior CIA, spy. I can't imagine that they didn't know.
Still serving, as far as we know?
I'm told you never leave the CIA.
Higher rank than her husband, I
correct.
understand. Yeah.
So you never leave the CIA. Now, why not share that with the parents? We understand that a lot of this must be classified and sensitive. Take us down into the basement of the Foreign Office and swear, make me swear an oath that I won't reveal it. But these parents want to know. The reason it's important is because they don't understand why Donald Trump is so busy protecting her. That's why it was important in the early days. Now that little piece of the puzzle is a bit clearer. But imagine these parents sitting there scratching their heads all these weeks and months wondering why the suspect is not here facing trial.
We're going to cover the diplomatic immunity a little later, but on the subject of Trump, when I was speaking to Charlotte on Monday, I think it was, the sort of the stunt that he was trying to pull, I mean, it's clearly it's really upset Charlotte, and understandably. Could you just remind us what he did?
So we were in New York doing a television interview, and I got a phone call from the White House out of the blue. I've never had a phone call from the White House before. I don't know if you ever have.
No.
Yeah, all the
That's
time.
the sort of thing
All
that
the
happens.
time.
It's not, inviting us down, asking us if we were available. And I didn't want to go because I know Donald Trump, and he doesn't do things for us. He does things for himself.
Yeah.
So I was one of the ones who said we shouldn't go. But I was eventually persuaded that, he would, if we didn't, he would take the opportunity to sort of...
I offered, they
and
refused.
they turned it down. So I was persuaded. So we then got on the train 3 hours down to Washington. The world's media following us. These poor parents, only 6 weeks earlier had lost their son.
Very fresh.
Now, I found it incredibly intimidating going into the Oval Office. Imagine what these poor parents were going through. And, I thought we were going to have a chat, maybe resolve the issue, talk about her coming back, or let him explain to us why she wasn't coming back. He was very charming and pleasant. Initially, he said he'd been following me. He made me feel like $1 million. He said I was doing great work, and he'd been watching me. And honestly, it made me really feel really, really good. But then the atmosphere changed in 2 seconds, and that's when he said, she's next door, and she wants to meet you. And I want, if
A reality TV show.
I mean, it really is.
if they'd given us, exactly.
It's the reveal.
If they'd given us some notice, in fact, we've got Anne Sacoolas here. Do you want to come to Washington and meet her? We might have discussed it. But imagine. And, listen, as an American, that should have been the proudest day of my life, going to the Oval Office. Not many Americans get to do it. To meet the President of the United States, it was one of the worst days of my life.
I have to ask this, even allowing for the fact it's a pretty sick stunt that Trump was trying to pull off, do you ever look back and think, if I had face-to-face time with Anne Sacoolas, if I could have looked into her eyes, if she could have seen the state of Charlotte and looked into her eyes, would it have found something resembling a conscience inside her?
That's a very good question, and thank you for asking it. Of course, you think about that all the time. I suspect, Matthew, the answer is yes, but you don't do it, as part of an ambush, without the parents being able to prepare themselves for it, without mediators and therapists around. And Charlotte had always been very clear, and the parents have been very clear, that if that meeting ever happened, and still to this day, if it ever happens, it'll be here on UK soil, in court, whether it's in Northampton where we live or, here in London. Charlotte really wanted to build a relationship with Anne Sacoolas at the beginning. You've met her. What an outstanding woman this is. And you and I couldn't do it.
I'm very impressed by how she conducts herself. That's one of the first things she said. She didn't,
she just, wanted to meet her and maybe build a relationship with her. And that's what all the early efforts were going into. And then she left.
We're going to take a break. Just before we do, I want you to tell us what you think about the diplomatic immunity that's cited by Sacoolas and her supporters in the US. We'll explore it after the break, but you don't think it holds water, do you?
It's completely irrelevant to the discussion. A lot of airtime is spent on it, wondering whether she has it, and if she does have it, does it apply to her? And it's a complete red herring, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail.
Rad Saiger, a neighbour, knew Harry from the age of 2, is with us and talking us through it. And just to sort of set up this final part of the discussion, just before the break, you were telling us, Rad, that you don't really buy the diplomatic immunity line. You say it doesn't stand to scrutiny. I assume that anybody who came over here working for any foreign government had some kind of immunity, and that, for good or bad, is the way it is.
So people here in London working out of embassies, foreign embassies, will be diplomats, and they will have diplomatic immunity. RAF Croughton is about 70 miles outside of London. They're spies there. They're not diplomats. So
the starting point is they're not diplomats.
Correct.
Right.
I could go through all the law, and it's very complicated.
Give us a little of it, if you could. Where does diplomatic immunity arise from?
Right. So it started after the Second World War, and as the Cold War came in, when people were worried that diplomats were being posted to hotspot countries.
Dangerous places.
Russia, North Korea. I don't want to single out countries,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you know, and that was the intention behind the convention that was called in 1961 in Vienna, when the global community came together and said, these people need protection. They may be in danger. If they get bundled into the back of a black van and kidnapped, the governments can go in, slap diplomatic community, and get them out of harm.
Right.
It is not a get-out-of-jail-free card if you drive on the wrong side of the road and take the life of a young man. Everybody knows it. The only organizations that are busy defending that position at the moment are the United States government and our government here.
Now, that must irk you and Harry's family enormously, because you're suggesting that the UK government is working in cahoots with the US government to deny Harry Dunn's
I
family
now
justice.
strongly believe that is the case. Let them prove otherwise. But why are they defending that position, that it's okay for Americans, or any diplomat for that matter, to come here, kill your children, our children, and then let the person go? That is not how it's going to work in the 21st century. And it's not just Harry's family. We're all in danger. There's millions of people out there who know that's the position.
And thousands of diplomatic cars. And then,
Quite.
and then we extend from that, thousands of cars driven by foreign nationals who aren't diplomats.
This is all about our safety. Now, we all know that collisions happen on the road, but you know, the Vienna Convention that I've just mentioned specifically says that if you are a diplomat, you are to respect and abide by your host country's rules and regulations. End of story. I could sit here for 3 hours and spell out the law.
Do you think you're... I mean, I hate to politicise it, but I can't ignore the fact that the UK is desperate for a trade deal with the US. Huawei, we've seen that Boris, who's obviously reluctant to withdraw or pull Huawei out of our 5G network because we're already committed to it, kit has been built, money has been spent. Apparently, his insistence that Huawei has a minor part to play has irked Donald Trump. You get the feeling that if you then say, well, and we want Anne Sacoolas, that would possibly be a step too far for the president.
It's the correct question to ask at this stage. I don't know the answer to that. But if you ask the parents, they're bright people, and you met Charlotte the other day, that is their very deep suspicion. It's my suspicion. And frankly, are the millions of supporters, and I dare say journalists as well, we're all forming our own conclusions. We know we've asked for disclosure from the government. Let them prove otherwise. They've refused to do it in every forum that we've asked. If they've got nothing to hide, sit in front of the parents and explain.
I thought Dominic Raab was working sort of hand in glove with you in the family.
Well, look, we went through a very difficult initial phase with him. Then the general election came and went, and there was a huge charm offensive. It made sense for me to bring the parents and the government onto the same page so that we could attack Donald Trump together. Then he wasn't candid with them. Relationships are all about trust. Trust is about the truth.
What about the... Oh, gosh, that upsets me just thinking. What about the video of Sacoolas with her children filling up her car in America? How did that go down with the family?
We've seen a couple of bits of footage. And Matthew, just like you break down, it makes me very upset as well. I've been with Charlotte both times she's seen that footage, and it's absolutely floored her. Because, like us, we can't imagine... If I had done this to somebody, just moving on with my life. Now, Charlotte still...
You'd have to look Charlotte in the eyes and say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it, but I'm
still,
sorry.
To this day, she harbors hope that Anne Sacoolas will wake up one day and think, you know what? It just isn't right to run from justice. I've got to go back. I've got to meet with Charlotte and talk to them. Harry was horrifically injured that night. The parents want to know, what was he saying? What was he doing? It was about 45 minutes. And, listen, I know what would happen if I was in New York or Washington, hired a car, drove on the wrong side of the road, took some people out and got on the next plane back home. They would all be up in arms. We're up in arms. Matthew, she needs to come back, and she needs to come back now.
Do you think she will ever come back?
Listen, sorry.
No, you go ahead, because I think you've got Trump there at the moment, which I imagine is a massive barrier. But he's not going to be there forever.
Most people think she won't come back.
And, listen, it's my job to represent this family, and that means bringing this lady back. I would not have started it if I wasn't 100% clear that she is coming back. We have moved a mountain. There was no sign of her ever being charged or extradition being sought. And with the help of you guys and the public, we've managed to get to that point. I always knew it was going to be rejected. What I can say to your listeners this afternoon is, there are discussions going on in the background. Trump will wake up one day and maybe send her back, maybe he won't. If we have to wait until Trump goes, that's absolutely fine. The extradition request will never go. Trump will go. This will hang over her head forever. If we have to wait until a reasonable administration comes in Washington and sends her back, that's fine. But, we all want her back now. There is not a shred or ounce of doubt in my mind that she's coming back. Otherwise, I'd be saying to the parents, let's move on.
Can I ask you, does Charlotte want Anne Sacoolas prosecuted, or does she want Anne Sacoolas to look her in the eye and say, I'm sorry?
Charlotte very simply wants Anne Sacoolas to do what you and I would have to do in very similar circumstances, which is present yourself to the authorities and go through the legal process. You will never hear Charlotte saying anything about whether she's guilty or not, or how long she should serve if she is guilty. This is an important point of principle. Whether you're Donald Trump or Anne Sacoolas or anybody, you or me, when the worst happens, you present yourself to the authorities, go through the legal system, as painful as that is. If we're going to set a precedent now that it's okay for Anne Sacoolas to run away, then frankly, I'll take my opportunity as well if this happens to me, and I'll say, well, good enough for her. We can't let it happen, and that's what Charlotte is advocating for.
You and the family have done an outstanding job. It's when you lose a child, there is an energy, I suppose, that comes from it, which I can see burning strongly in Charlotte. But as I was saying to you and her on Monday, it doesn't take long sometimes for the media to let the story, it starts to become, dare I say it, boring, overly familiar. You're not making,
Saturation.
You don't get enough headway, etc. Are you hopeful you can keep the pressure up over it? You're already talking about a period of possibly 5 more years.
What's incredible is you talk to Charlotte, and I think she mentioned this to you the other day. She made a promise to Harry the night he died that she would get him justice. Now, I know who's going to win this battle. It is the two administrations or Charlotte. She's 5'0", but has got the determination of, 50,000 people. She's not going to give up until she gets justice, and she will never break that promise. What's interesting, now is having started the ball rolling, people are doing stuff on their own. There are protests being organized outside the U.S. Embassy that I didn't even know about. People are, motorbikes are, the groups are riding on, places in Washington. I think even if I said to Charlotte now, you know what, I'm exhausted, I need to have a rest, and the parents are exhausted, this campaign is going to carry on without us. There are so many people now who are so upset by this that they're just going to do it for us, but we will never rest until this lady's back.
Can you tell us a little bit about the son that Charlotte lost? You knew him since he was 2 years old. What kind of a boy was he?
Lovely, happy, bubbly, a leader of a group. So he one of the reasons we're so clear about this is he was very principled about right versus wrong. My earliest memories of him are when he was 2 and in the local playgroup. I used to volunteer at the local school, so I would go on school trips. I've got a very clear memory of playing with him and his twin brother Niall, who is absolutely devastated, obviously. Just one of the brightest members of our very small community.
And the situation that Charlotte and the rest of the family have found themselves in, it's a tag glib to say, but it must have made a terrible situation that bit worse.
It's unimaginable. I obviously spend many hours a day with these people. They live just up the road from me. I can't begin to imagine what it's like losing a child. Imagine that pain. But then when you're thrown into this mess, they were abandoned by the authorities, left to their own devices, told that they had no chance of getting anyone held accountable for Harry's loss. Then they go through all this. Listen, but you met her the other day. She's a hero.
I don't know how she does it. I don't know how she gets up in the morning.
Precisely. She's a hero. She needs to come out and teach you and I how to deal with adversity.
What about our Prime Minister, our charismatic Prime Minister? Have you had much FaceTime with him?
That's the most disappointing thing in all this. Even Donald Trump, as clumsy as he was, sat down with Charlotte, held her hand.
You're not going to tell me you haven't seen Boris Johnson, though?
I've asked many, many times, Matthew.
You are joking.
Many, many times. I don't want to politicize this. I just don't know him at all. I've been told by senior cabinet members that they will arrange meetings with him. Senior cabinet members have said, you are entitled to see Mr. Johnson, and we will arrange that. He is, at least half a dozen times I've asked. He's running from us. He doesn't, unlike you had the courage the other day to sit down with Charlotte, look her in the eye, put your arm around her and help her. And she's so grateful for that. I don't believe he's got the moral courage or fiber to do it. I think he knows that there are some and I will look, as you can tell, everybody knows me by now, I will look you directly in the eye and I will hold you to account. I don't think he's got the courage to face us. What the hell went on, and why isn't he demanding a review of the diplomatic immunity position? Let's improve road safety so this never happens again. Heads buried in the sand, Matthew. And look, I don't want to politicize it, but I am absolutely sick to death of asking him to meet with us.
You are caught in a political situation, so it is inevitable you will have to. I am aghast that our Prime Minister hasn't met Charlotte. I'm absolutely aghast. If only because I thought Boris quite likes a good publicity opportunity, consoling a grieving mother. I would have thought would have been a good political move, and it would give Charlotte so much comfort, I have to say.
And you could legitimately say, Matthew, he's got lots on his plate.
Sure.
I have been told by senior cabinet members that Harry Dunn is the #1 item on the agenda because it's about our safety. It's about the relationship. He seems to find time to do, friendly interviews on BBC Breakfast and whatever. He can make time for Charlotte, and he should do. And if he continues to run from this, it's a disgrace.
Rad Saiga, you're doing an extraordinary. You're doing an extraordinary job, and all our best to the family.
Thank you so much.